Good morning, I'm Fox Cellars, and today I want to talk about Westerns, specifically Westerns in film, and I'm going to give you my list of my favorite 22 greatest Westerns of all times. Now, before I do that, I want to kind of do like a prelude, and that's what this video is for. It'll lead into the 22 greatest Westerns of all times. This one is to talk about maybe some of those honorable mentions, some ones that I loved that didn't make the list, and then also some ones that really are esteemed in the industry, but not my favorites, and I wanted to recognize some of those as well. Before I get into the top 22, please go ahead, click, like, and subscribe to my channel. It'll help out my channel. You'll get keyed in on similar types of videos, especially if you like anything to do with movies or entertainment or even just storytelling in general. The first of my honorable mentions is The Naked Spur, which is a 1953 movie starring James Stewart. And he's a bounty hunter that's gone after this guy that's kind of climbed up in the Colorado Rockies. It's got really great scenery. It's also got Janet Leigh in it. And the tension that builds in this film is that he kind of gets himself into some situations where he no longer has the upper hand. He has to trust the other person. He doesn't. You as the viewer don't trust him. And it's a thriller in that sense where you're emotionally like, what's going to happen now? Oh, he's got himself in a situation. So I wanted to mention that one. Next I want to mention is The Gunfighter. Gunfighter is typically on most people's list with Gregory Peck. I love The Gunfighter. However, it didn't make my list because it's a little light on the action. It's a situation where he's coming to town. He had killed somebody, but in self-defense, and the town is kind of surrounding him. And he's an ex-sheriff. Gregory Peck does a fantastic job in it. It's a great movie, by the way. It's just didn't make my top 22 list. Wanted to include that. Joe Kidd is one I want to mention. Great Clint Eastwood movie. Kind of one of the more forgotten ones because he's got so many that are higher up on the list, but this is one that resonated with me. Always loved it. It's got some really great tension between Robert Duvall and Clint Eastwood's character, as well as John Saxon. He's a bounty hunter. He's got to go up in the mountains, and they've kind of like cornered off this. It's almost like a village that John Saxon has taken over. And there's a lot of these little moments of really clever ideas that Clint Eastwood comes up with to kind of get the upper hand. Always loved the movie. I'm actually, now that I've talked about it, I kind of want to go back and see it again. I haven't seen it in a couple of years. Next is The Skin Game. This is a 1971 movie with James Garner, Louis Gossett Jr., and I think Susan Clark is in it. And this is one of the rare Westerns where it's a comedy. The Skin Game's about these two guys, James Garner and then Louis Gossett Jr., who go into town. Louis Gossett Jr., black man, of course, who James Garner sells him off in each town. And then in the middle of the night, they kind of scurry off with all the money that he got back from the sale. And then they go on to the next town and they do it over and over and over again. Now, it's set up as a comedy, but the movie starts to get a little serious. And naturally, this setup is just doomed right from the get-go. So you can tell where this is going to go. And it's just as fun, it's just as thrilling, it's just as exciting. And the tension with Susan Clark, too, is really interesting. So it's one of those movies, I don't think a lot of people know about it, but like if you get the chance, kind of go and find it. It's extremely entertaining, and that's all you can ask for in any one of these types of movies. So the next movie I'm going to mention is Django Unchained. And Quentin Tarantino only did, I think, 2 Westerns. Both of them are going to show up on my list. They're both fantastic. He just has this way of taking his type of either they be B movies or just, lesser interest kind of textured films and being like, you know what, this is how it should be done, and then showing everybody how it should be done. That's what Tarantino does in this case. And Django Unchained takes all the things about the kind of like, 12 Years a Slave kind of idea, throws revenge into it, and just like blows it up into this idea of how you do it. If you're like, if that were me, this is what I would do. And this just rolls with that. It's really a lot of fun. It's actually, it's a little bit of a comedy, in a certain extent, but it's hardcore. The next I'm going to list, and this is probably going to really irritate a lot of people, is I did not have The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly on my top 22 list. I know, but I'm going to group those three of those movies together. Fistful of Dollars, For a Few More Dollars, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Put them all kind of as one. They make my honorable mention list. And for me, I like the first movie the best. That's the one that copied the Akira Kurosawa movie Yojimbo very closely with that first movie where he goes into town and he's playing the two sides against each other and he's just collecting money and he's kind of the smart one that's just letting them, cut their own throats back and forth. So that one stayed fairly true. The second one wasn't as good, but it's a great Western. And then the third one, I will acknowledge that the cinematography, just the execution of it, is spectacular. I mean, it's really just a beautifully shot, well done movie. It's just not one of my top 22. It just didn't make the list. So, and I have a favoritism towards the first one. So I apologize to everybody that's freaking out that it's not on the list. They Died with Their Boots On I'm kind of kicking myself for not being able to get more Errol Flynn movies in there, but this is probably one of Errol Flynn's best Western type movies. It tells the story of General Custer and his last stand, and it's very awe-inspiring. There's a lot of speeches in front of a cavalry and getting excited and going out in front of the group and against all odds, and we all know how it ends, but it is one of the better Westerns that Errol Flynn's in, and it's got Olivia de Havilland in it, and it's just great. So it didn't make the list, but it's honorable mention, of course. High Noon is one that, of course, is on most people's list. It was nominated for Best Picture. It's very well acted. It's very well written as far as the dialogue goes on it. It's a little light on the action. I feel it's a little overrated, but I only say that because it's super highly rated. So I'm it should be highly rated, not super highly rated, but great movie. It should be on a lot of people's lists. It's not on my list, but it makes an honorable mention, and it's a really great movie. And if you haven't seen it, go ahead and see it. It's fantastic. My next honorable mention is going to be my first Sam Peckinpah on the list. Sam Peckinpah a lot of his movies don't make my list, but there's a couple on here. This is the first one that shows up. I would have loved to have kind of squeezed in Major Dundee. It just didn't quite make it, but it's one of those movies. There's a couple versions of it. Sam Peckinpah has a longer version that came out more recently. And that's the one that I've seen. I haven't seen the one that from back in the day, so I don't know originally what it was meant to look like, but Major Dundee it's this sprawling movie where they kind of go across the countryside, and I think they're going to Mexico, and what they're doing is they're looking for these Apaches that had destroyed this village, and they're kind of hired as bounty hunters to go after and kill them. And it's just jam-packed with great actors, great scenes. There's a lot of disagreements that go on between, Charlton Heston's in it, Richard Harris is in it, Slim Pickens is in it, Warren Oates is in it. It's pretty stacked, and it has a lot of really great scenes. And now down to my last two that are honorable mentions. There's Red River, which is a great John Wayne movie. This doesn't make the list, and I'm intentionally kind of it's good enough to make my list. I intentionally kind of just left it just the side because I have a couple of problems with it. But it's really great, and as the movie's progressing, you're hoping this is what's going to happen, and it's kind of dark. And they're part of a cattle drive that John Wayne is in charge of, and he's got kind of some old school narrow type ways of doing this, a little rough around the edges, a bit mean, and members of that cattle drive turn against him. So the ending isn't as satisfying as I would have hoped. It's such a great movie. The ending could have been one thing different and would have made the movie great, but it's a typical Howard Hawks movie that's just fantastic. And then the last one that I'm going to include on here is The Misfits, which is a John Huston movie. I absolutely love John Huston. If you've seen any of my other videos talking about film, John Huston is always on the list. And this one is the acting in it is just, it blows my mind. Marilyn Monroe is fantastic in it. Montgomery Clift is fantastic in it. Elijah Wallach is fantastic in it. And who is Clark Gable. It's his last movie. It's Marilyn Monroe's last movie. I think it might have been Montgomery Clift, one of his later movies. I don't think it's his last movie, but anyway, they all just act so well in it. It's got, horse wrangling in it, and it's not like an old Western. It takes place I think it takes place in the 40s or 50s or something like that, but it's a Western, so, and I want to include, it's always been one of my favorite movies. It just didn't quite make it. Okay. So that's it for the honorable mentions. If you'd like to see the top 22 Westerns and films of all times, there should be a link below. Check it out. It's going to be a follow-up to this video. And if you haven't already, please click like and subscribe below. You'll be made aware of videos just like this to come. I'm Fox Cellars. Thanks.